In the winter of 1778, the Continental Army was dying, not from British bullets, from cold, from hunger, from disease. At a frozen camp in Pennsylvania called Valley Forge, nearly 2,000 soldiers would not survive to see spring. The men who were still alive did not have shoes. Many of them wrapped rags around their feet and left bloody footprints in the snow. They did not know how to march in formation. They did not know how to fight with a bayonet. Entire regiments could not perform a basic maneuver without collapsing into chaos. George Washington had an army in name only, and everyone from Congress to the King of England knew it. And then, in the last week of February, a sleigh pulled into camp carrying a stocky, loud, foul-mouthed European nobleman in a fur coat, trailed by a small Italian greyhound and a group of servants. He could not speak English. He had never held an independent command in his life. And according to the very first letter that introduced him to George Washington, he was a former lieutenant general in the army of Frederick the Great. That claim was not true. Not even close. His name was Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, and within 4 months, this exaggerated, broke, scandal-scarred former captain would take the most pathetic fighting force in North America and turn it into an army that could stand toe-to-toe with the best infantry in the world. To understand how a man with a fake title and no money became one of the most important figures in American military history, you have to go back to Prussia, to a war that made him, and a scandal that nearly destroyed him. A soldier since childhood, Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben was born in 1730 in Magdeburg, Prussia, into a family that had known almost nothing but military life for generations. His father was a Prussian army engineer, and by the time Steuben was 14 years old, he was already standing beside his father watching Prussian engineers conduct the siege of Prague. War was not an abstraction to this kid. It was the family business. He enlisted in the Prussian army in his mid-teens, and the Prussian army in the 1740s was not just any army. It was widely considered the most disciplined, most professional fighting force in Europe, a machine built on brutal drill and absolute precision. Steuben thrived in that machine. He fought through the 7 Years' War, one of the bloodiest conflicts of the century, and he rose through the ranks. Eventually, he caught the attention of Frederick the Great himself, one of the most celebrated military commanders in European history, and became his aide-de-camp. For a career soldier, that was about as high as you could climb without a noble bloodline to carry you further. And then, in 1763, at the age of 33, and holding the rank of captain, Steuben was abruptly discharged from the Prussian army. Nobody knows exactly why. The official record does not say. What we do know is that Steuben spent the rest of his life trying to outrun the silence around that discharge. The Baron who was not a Baron. After his discharge, Steuben needed work, and work meant attaching himself to whatever minor court would take him. He found a position at the tiny Principality of Hohenzollern-Hechingen in southwestern Germany, serving as chamberlain, essentially a palace manager, to a prince with more ambition than money. It was here that Steuben started calling himself a Baron, a title that was not exactly earned through bloodline, but that he wore anyway. He served this court for over a decade, even traveling with the prince to France in a failed attempt to borrow money to keep the tiny principality solvent. By 1777 the prince's court was broke, and so was Steuben. He was in his late 40s, unemployed, deep in debt, and running out of options in a Europe that had very little use for aging former captains with fabricated titles. Then something happened that forced his hand completely. An anonymous accusation reached the prince's court, alleging that Steuben had taken inappropriate liberties with young men in his household. Historians who have studied the case closely have found the evidence thin and the accusation almost certainly weaponized, the kind of smear that got attached to any man in that era whose private life did not fit the expected mold. Rumors about Steuben's attraction to men had followed him for years, and in 18th century Europe, that alone was enough to destroy a career and end a life if the wrong person decided to pursue it formally. Whatever the truth of the specific accusation, the result was immediate. Steuben did not stay to defend himself. He fled the court and headed for Paris, a ruined man with nothing left to lose and a continent that had no place for him anymore. An exaggeration that changed history. In Paris, Steuben's fortunes turned, but not because anyone discovered the truth about his rank or his past. They turned because of a lie, or more precisely, a mistranslation that nobody bothered to correct. Steuben reconnected with an old acquaintance, the Comte de Saint-Germain, who was now serving as France's Minister of War. Saint-Germain believed the struggling Americans, locked in a desperate war against the most powerful military in the world, could use exactly the kind of Prussian-trained discipline Steuben had absorbed during his years under Frederick the Great. He introduced Steuben to Benjamin Franklin, who was in Paris trying to drum up any European support he could find for the revolution. Franklin wrote a letter of introduction to George Washington, describing Steuben as a lieutenant general in the service of the King of Prussia. It was not true. Steuben had left Prussian service as a captain 14 years earlier and had never commanded so much as a battalion independently in his life. Whether this was a deliberate exaggeration to make the offer more attractive or simply a translation error nobody caught remains debated. What is certain is that nobody corrected it before Steuben set sail. The Continental Congress had already been burned by a wave of European mercenaries showing up with inflated titles demanding officer commissions and salaries the fledgling nation could not afford. So this time Franklin and Steuben structured the deal differently. Steuben would travel to America as a volunteer, agreeing to accept no pay at all unless the Americans actually won the war. It was a bet on himself, and on a revolution that most of Europe assumed was already lost. On September 26, 1777, Steuben's ship reached Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the very same colony that would later produce John Stark, though the two men's stories would never cross. From there Steuben traveled to Boston, where he was, according to multiple accounts, extravagantly entertained, and then made his way to York, Pennsylvania, where the Continental Congress had relocated after the British captured Philadelphia. Congress accepted his offer to serve as a volunteer. On February 23, 1778, Steuben's sleigh rolled into the winter encampment at Valley Forge, and the fur-wrapped baron, who was not technically a baron, riding beside his greyhound, whose name was Azor, came face to face with the worst army he had ever seen in his life. Arrival at Valley Forge. What Steuben found at Valley Forge shocked even a man who had grown up around war. The Continental Army was not a unified fighting force. It was a patchwork of state militias, each trained differently, or not trained at all, each following different drill commands, each answering to officers with wildly inconsistent standards. Soldiers did not know how to load and fire in formation efficiently. Sanitation in the camp was almost non-existent, which was part of why disease was killing more men that winter than British muskets ever had. Steuben later wrote that the army's weapons were, in his words, in horrible condition, covered with rust. He did not speak English. He communicated in French and German, with aides translating on the fly, and when frustration boiled over, by all accounts, he swore. He knew exactly one English curse word, and multiple accounts from soldiers who trained under him describe him bellowing it across the drill field when a formation fell apart. But here is what made Steuben different from every other European officer who had shown up looking for a commission. He did not treat the Continental soldiers like they were beneath him. He got down in the mud with them. He personally selected 100 men and formed what became known as the Model Company. And instead of simply issuing orders from a distance the way a Prussian officer of his old rank would have, he drilled these men himself, adjusting their musket positions with his own hands, walking the line, showing them exactly how a foot should be placed and a rifle should be held. He taught them to march at 75 steps a minute, then pushed them to 120. When formations broke down, he did not just get angry, he got specific. He would demonstrate the movement himself, then have his aides translate his corrections into English for the men to understand. It was slow, and it was humiliating for men used to thinking of themselves as free citizen soldiers, not conscripts being broken down like recruits. But it worked. Word spread through the camp, and other officers began asking to have their own companies trained the same way. Within weeks, this 100-man model company had effectively become the instructors for the entire army, each soldier passing along what Steuben had drilled into them to the regiment they came from, writing the book that built an army. Steuben's genius was not only in the parade ground drilling, it was in what he did afterward. Working through the winter of 1778 into 1779, he sat down to write an entirely new training manual for the American military, one adapted specifically for a citizen army rather than a rigid European aristocracy of career soldiers. Because he still did not speak fluent English, he wrote it in French, and two of Washington's most trusted aides, Alexander Hamilton and Nathaniel Greene, worked alongside him to translate it into clear, usable English. The result became known as the Blue Book, formerly titled Regulations for the Order and Discipline of the Troops of the United States. It laid out standardized drills, chain of command, camp sanitation procedures, and bayonet techniques, all things the Continental Army had never had a unified system for. This was not a small technical achievement. It was the difference between an armed mob and an army. The Blue Book would remain the official training manual of the United States military for decades, still in active use as late as the War of 1812. More than 30 years after it was written by a man who was, at best, a former captain wearing a title he had given himself. But a manual on paper does not win battles. The Continental Army was about to find out whether Steuben's training actually worked. And they were going to find out against the same British army that had chased them out of Philadelphia the year before. The first test. The Continental Army's discipline under Steuben's new system was put to the test almost immediately once the weather broke. On May 20th, 1778, at the Battle of Baron Hill, American forces executed a fighting retreat with a level of coordination that surprised British commanders expecting the same disorganized militia they had beaten so many times before. But the real proof came 3 weeks later. On June 28, 1778, the British Army, having abandoned Philadelphia, was marching across New Jersey toward New York when Washington's forces caught up with them near a town called Monmouth Courthouse. This was the same Continental Army that had barely survived Valley Forge only months earlier, and it fought the British regulars, widely considered the best infantry on earth, to a standstill in open field combat. American units held their lines under artillery fire. They executed complex maneuvers under pressure without collapsing into chaos. Officers who had witnessed the army before Valley Forge and after could barely believe it was the same fighting force. The Battle of Monmouth ended without a clear winner, but that in itself was the victory. An army that could stand and fight the British to a draw in an open field, rather than simply surviving to retreat another day, was something entirely new. It was Steuben's drill ground made real, translated directly from the parade field at Valley Forge into a battlefield in New Jersey. Washington took notice. On Washington's recommendation, Congress formally appointed Steuben Inspector General of the Continental Army, with the rank of Major General, a rank that, unlike the one Franklin had originally claimed for him, he had now genuinely earned through results. The South and Yorktown. After Monmouth, Steuben's role expanded well beyond the drill field. Washington sent him south to assist General Nathanael Greene, who was fighting a grinding campaign against the British in the Carolinas and Virginia. Steuben spent time in Virginia organizing supplies, training new recruits, and helping funnel troops and equipment to the forces that would need them for the war's final act. In the spring of 1781, he was superseded in his Virginia command by the Marquis de Lafayette, but rather than treating this as another insult from a war full of them, Steuben stayed in the fight, delivering hundreds of Continental soldiers to reinforce Lafayette's forces that June. That fall, Steuben commanded one of the 3 divisions of Washington's army at the Siege of Yorktown, the campaign that would finally break the British war effort in America. When British General Charles Cornwallis's forces, trapped between Washington's army on land and a French fleet blocking any escape by sea, finally reached the breaking point, it was Steuben's division that was on duty in the trenches when the initial overture of surrender came through from the British side. The war that had started with Steuben arriving at Valley Forge as an unproven volunteer with a fabricated title ended with him standing in the trenches at Yorktown as the British army that had chased the Continentals across 3 states finally gave up. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. It was effectively the end of major fighting in the Revolutionary War, and it happened because an army that could not march in a straight line 4 years earlier had learned to fight like professionals. What the war cost him, and what it gave him. When the war ended, Steuben had given the United States something it could never fully repay in money, though Congress tried. He was granted American citizenship, first by the Pennsylvania legislature in 1784, and later formally by New York in 1786. The states of New York, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey all granted him land in gratitude for his service, and New York alone gave him 16,000 acres north of the Mohawk River. Congress awarded him a gold-hilted sword and, eventually, an annual pension. But Steuben, true to the same instincts that had led him to call himself a baron with no bloodline to back it up, spent lavishly and settled into an extravagant lifestyle in New York City that regularly outpaced even this generous support. Despite the land grants and the pension, he fell into debt more than once and had to be bailed out by friends who remained fiercely loyal to him. He never married. He settled with 2 of his closest wartime aides and companions, Benjamin Walker and William North, both of whom remained devoted to him for the rest of his life, with North in particular staying by his side through his final years. Steuben spent his later years involved in charitable work, serving as president of the German Society of the City of New York, an organization dedicated to helping newly arrived German immigrants find their footing in the country he had adopted as his own. He also contributed ideas toward the eventual founding of a national military academy, a concept that would later become West Point. On November 28, 1794, at his estate near Remsen, New York, Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, died at the age of 64. He was buried in a simple grove on his own land, the same modest ending that men like John Stark would later choose for themselves, a quiet retreat after a life spent in service to a country that was not the one he was born in, a fabrication that became the truth. Here is what makes Steuben's story worth remembering. He arrived in America under a title he did not truly hold, introduced by a letter that overstated his rank, funded by nothing but a promise of pay. If the Americans somehow managed to win a war most of Europe had already written off. He was, by any strict definition, exactly the kind of foreign opportunist the Continental Congress had grown suspicious of. A man chasing money and status in a country that could offer him a fresh start after Europe had run him out. But Steuben did something almost none of those other foreign officers managed. He did not simply demand a commission and disappear into a desk job. He got in the mud with starving, half-frozen soldiers who could not understand a word he said, and he taught them, one formation at a time, how to become an army. The fabricated title Benjamin Franklin gave him on paper eventually became true in every way that mattered. Earned in the snow at Valley Forge, proven on the field at Monmouth, and sealed in the trenches at Yorktown. The United States Army still traces its institutional discipline back to the blue book he wrote with Hamilton and Greene translating at his side. Today, statues of Steuben stand in Washington, D.C., and in cities across the country with large German-American communities. There is a Steuben Day parade held annually in his honor. A town in New York still bears his name. The soldiers who could barely march in a straight line in February of 1778 went on to fight the British Army to a standstill in open combat just 4 months later, and it happened because a broke, scandal-scarred former Prussian captain decided that reinventing himself in America was worth betting everything on. He came to the revolution as a foreign mercenary, chasing a paycheck he might never see. He left it as one of the founding architects of the American military. If you made it this far, do me a favor and hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Drop a like on this video and let me know in the comments which overlooked historical figure you think deserves their own deep dive.